This hearing will come to order. Thank you all for being here. My colleagues, today we meet with our friends and colleagues from the Baltic states, and we meet against the backdrop of the horrifying and totally unprovoked assault by Vladimir Putin against the Ukrainian people, now entering its third week. I want to begin by thanking Senator Cardin, our chairman, for allowing me to call this hearing to order. He generously did so because the impulse for this hearing originated in a meeting I had in my office on September 15 with Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis. At that time, the minister and I agreed that the challenges facing the Baltic states, including the potential of further Russian aggression, the continued crisis in Belarus, and China's pressure campaign against Lithuania over Taiwan merited additional attention in Washington, and that the Helsinki Commission was a natural home for such a conversation. What we did not know, of course, was the extent to which Putin's callous and brutal designs would make this exchange even more urgent and timely. Indeed, since my meeting with Minister Landsbergis, the Baltic states find themselves in an even more challenging security situation than a few months ago. Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine has closed the door once and for all on any hope that his regime might be passively deterred and perhaps through diplomatic means come to play a responsible role in the international system. That idea is now over forever. Having traveled to Kyiv in January with a bipartisan delegation to meet with President Zelensky, and more recently, having traveled this past weekend to Poland and the Ukraine border, I can attest that the crimes being perpetrated in Ukraine are creating huge humanitarian and military challenges for our NATO allies, and that we have not, to the extent that we've not seen since perhaps the height of the Cold War. I might mention to my colleagues that night before last, the United States Senate passed legislation calling the actions of Vladimir Putin war crimes. And I was heartened, my colleagues, that the President of the United States yesterday, when asked specifically that question, did also come to that public conclusion that what Mr. Putin is doing is amounts to war crimes and that he is a war criminal. Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine has closed the door once and for all for any hope. The situation for the Baltic states has been further complicated by the Lukashenko regime's utter subservience to Moscow. Mr. Lukashenko now leads a client state of Russia. The unprecedented deployment of Russian forces into Belarus and the prospect of more to come, and for a limited period of time, an unlimited period of time, creates an entirely new set of challenges for our Baltic allies. And of course, other pressures continue to press on our Baltic friends, including China's disproportionate response to the courageous and principled stand taken by our Lithuanian friends regarding Taiwan. Our Baltic friends have not been cowed by these challenges. On the contrary, they have been at the forefront of supporting Ukraine, providing not only moral support, but also providing funds and military equipment. Once again, in this crisis, the three Baltic countries are punching above their weight, and I have every expectation they will continue to do so. As our guests are aware, members of our commission have long been supporters of the Baltic states. This hearing aligns with other efforts we've made to remain engaged with our Baltic friends, including the very recent congressional delegation visits to the region in July of 2021 and February of this year. This hearing also follows an event I had the honor to convene in July of 2019, when the Helsinki Commission held an unprecedented field hearing on Baltic Sea regional security in Gdansk, Poland, our first ever hearing away from U.S. soil. I will note that on every one of these occasions, and on others, our Baltic friends have warned us about the gathering storm clouds under Putin's regime and of the possibility of the kind of tragic events we are now seeing unfold. My colleagues, it is my hope that in today's hearing, we will explore three main threads. First, how can we best support our Baltic friends in meeting their direct security challenges from Russia, Belarus, and China? Secondly, how can we deepen our partnership to provide even more effective support for Ukraine and others who stand in the looming shadow of Moscow? And third, how can we work together to make sure Vladimir Putin loses this fight as quickly and as decisively as possible? I'm especially pleased to be having this conversation with senior leaders of three parliaments of the Baltic states, our natural interlocutors on all issues of mutual concern. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists, I call on my dear friend from Tennessee, Representative Cohen, for any remarks he might make.
Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to welcome each of you to our meeting. The three of you, the foreign affairs chairs of your parliaments in the Baltics, will bring us information that we need to hear and the American public needs to hear about the dangers to NATO countries on the eastern edge, bumping up to Russia. Now, I'm a member of the House. These other two gentlemen on my right are members of the Senate. The House, we don't have meeting rooms like this that remind me of Putin, where we're so far away from everybody. Very bizarre. But I see you out there, I think, without binoculars. But it's nice to have you here.
I move that we rearrange the chairs.
Y'all are on the edge of Russia and have warned us for years. And I visited all of your countries, most recently Lithuania, where we were, and we visited with the Madam Chair just about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago it was. And I've been with Estonia. Mr. Wicker was on the Kodel. We visited in Estonia, and I've been there several times in Latvia as well. Y'all are sitting right there on the edge of Russia. We visited when we were in Estonia. We went to the east of Estonia to where you can get there at that castle, and you can look out, and there's the castle on the Estonian side, and there's the castle on the Russian side, and they're just cannons apart. And it's right there. And we went on the river, and we saw the Russian patrols, border patrols, and the barrier. It wasn't much. I suspect if the three Baltic countries were not members of NATO, you might have already met Vladimir Putin's armies. He has arisen lately in his desire to have a Soviet Union reconstituted, or Peter the Great Russia reconstituted, and he's seeing himself as the Great Peter. He's a dangerous man, and we want to assure you that we are with you. I did a little journey in Vilnius to visit the Jewish Center, which is unfortunately all historical and just markers where the Jewish people lived in Vilnius because they were wiped out by the Nazis and not treated too terribly well by the Soviets, who the Lithuanians fought for, I think it was 9 years with guerrilla warfare and fought against the Soviet occupation of their country. They were, to some extent, the Ukrainians of that period in the 1940s and early 50s and resisting the Soviet oppression. But there's a plaque which we were shown on the wall of the Vilnius Town Hall, and it's a quote from President George Bush that says, "Anyone who would choose Lithuania as an enemy has also made an enemy of the United States of America." Our tour guide was very proud to show us that. I was proud to see it. And on this issue, Americans are bipartisan. There are a few people out there that are on the fringe of everything, and they were on the fringe of graduating from high school, I think, that are not necessarily with us. But I would say 95% of the House, and I suspect 100% of the Senate, supports strongly NATO and our relationship with our NATO allies in Article 5, and we will be there with you as President Bush was and America is today. We visited with our troops, American troops that are up, I guess, north of Vilnius, and I think it was like 8 or 10 kilometers from Russians who, as we were told, occupied the former Soviet forts that were built on the border of Lithuania, and for a reason. And they, I guess, I got the impression that they had not been in use lately, but now the Russians have occupied them. So they're right there on the border and close up. And of course, we've got the Suwalki Pass, which is a serious question about whether the Russians would want to come and take that and divide the Baltic countries all away from the other countries in NATO to the south, Poland in particular, and put the Baltic countries at great risk, and that would connect them with Kaliningrad, which is a Russian port on the Baltic. There are not a lot of people in the world that know about Kaliningrad and the weapons they have, and the importance it is to Russia and the Suwalki Pass, and how important that is, and how we need to defend it. And it makes an attractive target for Putin. So the Biden administration understands these threats. We are pretty much together with the Biden administration and its sanctions that it's put together with all the Western allies, the support we've given to Ukraine. And I know when I was in Lithuania, we met with your prime minister, we met with your president, we were hosted for lunch with your parliamentarians, and we met with your foreign minister. We got a good perspective on how much people in Lithuania are on the alert, and they should be. And we got the same thing. We went to Estonia with the president there, and our visit to the East Coast, where there were still some, obvious Russian monuments still up, showing that the Russians had basically taken. You go through there, the people were walking around. It looked like an old Soviet city, and it is an old Soviet city. They took Russian people and they moved them into Estonia to make their presence permanent, and they'll be doing the same thing in Ukraine. Putin is happy when people leave Ukraine because he's going to replace them with Russians and Russian passports and try to make Ukraine Russian. It's not going to be easy, and I don't think it'll be successful. So we're with you. We appreciate your being here. We look forward to your remarks and your perspectives on Vladimir Putin, his actions in Ukraine, the challenges all this presents to your countries and defense, and how much the United States can help you. We know Lithuania wants a permanent force. We made some suggestions to our military folks about that, and our State Department people. We have a battalion there now, and I think each of the other Baltic countries would like a permanent American force there. I support it, and I think some of the other members of Congress would support it. It's a major undertaking to move those kind of people and what's necessary into those countries. But at this time in the world's history, it may be necessary for us to undertake that responsibility. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Chairman Cohen. Senator Cardin, do you have opening remarks?
Well, first, let me welcome our colleagues and friends from the Baltic states, from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I want to thank Senator Wicker for his leadership on the Helsinki Commission, bringing us together in regards to the game changer, the Baltics under pressure. Senator Wicker has been a leader on this issue on the Helsinki Commission, as well as on the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, participating on a Saturday special session of the Standing Committee, where unity was shown within the OSCE in regards to supporting Ukraine against the aggression of Mr. Putin. I think we all have been just inspired by the extraordinary, courageous leadership of President Zelensky. He addressed a joint meeting of Congress yesterday morning, and it was powerful. I am proud of the leadership of President Biden and Congress by our actions against the unprovoked attack by Mr. Putin on Ukraine. We have led by our actions. We have supplied defensive lethal weapons so that Ukraine can defend itself. We have imposed the strongest sanctions ever against Russia. And we have provided humanitarian assistance to deal with the humanitarian crisis within Ukraine, as well as the refugees that are leaving Ukraine. And we have been able, under President Biden's leadership, to unify the global community to isolate Mr. Putin and Russia. So we have been effective in what we've done. But we must do more. So, Mr. Chairman, I want you to know today in the House of Representatives, they will be considering legislation that will remove Russia from PNTR, which is our trade partnership in the WTO. That legislation, as I understand it, will be considered on the floor of the United States House of Representatives today. I also understand that attached to that bill is legislation that Senator Wicker and I have authored that would not only make permanent the global Magnitsky sanctions, but expand those sanctions to include the enablers, those who enable these crimes to take place. So we're not finished. And I can assure you that we will never recognize Russia's aggression in Ukraine and the legitimacy of any territory that they may control will always be Ukraine. As we did with the Baltic states when they were overtaken by the Soviet Union. This summer, we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. We always recognize the sovereignty of the Baltic states. So you know firsthand what the Ukrainian people are going through. In 1991, I was in Lithuania, and Latvia, and Estonia. I saw firsthand the Soviet-Russian tanks surrounding the Parliament building in Vilnius. I met with the courageous leaders of Lithuania in the Parliament building to show our solidarity against the oppression at that time. I stayed in a hotel in Riga in which there were bullet holes in the walls from the Russians. Just recently, Senator Wicker and I, Congressman Cohn and others have been to Estonia. We're in Tallinn just this past July. And we had a chance to visit the Narva city on the Russian border. And we saw firsthand how the Baltic states are dealing with representative government protecting the rights of all of its citizens. I mention that because you all understand the risk of where you are and what Russia has done in the past and its risk to your sovereignty. So I want you to understand that when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, we stood with the Ukrainians, never recognizing the takeover of Crimea. And we will continue to stand with the Ukrainian people. In regards to the Baltic states, it's different today than it was in 1991. You are now NATO members, and you are helping secure the defense of Europe by your contributions. I am particularly proud of the partnership of my state of Maryland, our National Guard, with Estonia in our defense that we have since 1993, if I remember correctly. We understand our commitments under Article 5 of NATO. We stand with you on your sovereignty and will be there to protect the sovereignty of your countries against any attempt by Russia to interfere with that. But we also must be united in our support for the Ukrainian people and make sure that we supply everything we can so they can defend themselves. Make no mistake about it. Mr. Putin will never take away the independence of Ukraine.
Members of the panel, you've traveled far, and I can assure you, you are going to get to talk in a few moments. We're going to take a moment or two, though, to recognize two more people for opening remarks. Representative Joe Wilson is the Republican co-chair of the Helsinki Commission in the House of Representatives. And Representative Wilson, you are recognized for 2 or 3 minutes
Yes.
for opening remarks.
Hey, thank you very much, and Ranking Member Roger Wicker and Chairman Ben Cardin and Co-Chair Steve Cohen for holding this extraordinary hearing. It's to show our appreciation for our Baltic allies, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And we always know that they're an inspiration, that they never gave up on promoting their independence and freedom and their commitment now to NATO. I am also grateful that I visited all 3 republics, and Americans can always be grateful that in 1940, the United States never recognized the occupation as devised and divided by Hitler and Stalin. We always recognized that the Baltic republics were independent states and not part of the Soviet socialist dictatorship. Only a few weeks ago, I had the honor to be in Lithuania with the delegation organized by the Commission. The main message was to clearly, bipartisan, indicate and show that America is fully committed to Article 5 of the NATO treaty to protect, as American reassures, every inch of NATO will be protected. I was also impressed by the support our Baltic friends are providing to Belarusian dissidents, activists, and opposition politicians. I was especially inspired to meet again with the leader of Belarus Democratic Forces, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. It is my belief that thanks to our Baltic allies, that one day democracy will prevail again in Belarus. The dictatorship of Lukashenko, who has become a puppet of Putin, Lukashenko will soon be replaced as the people prevail. Additionally, another war we need to win, and again firmly we will, is the ruthless war by Putin against the people of Ukraine. Putin is indiscriminately shelling cities, killing innocent women and children. Civilian deaths by the thousands. The Baltic allies have been in the forefront of trying to stop the advance by Putin and from moving further west. You're a wall. And in fact, Zelensky has referred today, speaking to the German Bundestag, to tear down the wall and hopefully open up Russia to a better future. And we'll not forget that Putin is not just an enemy of the Ukrainian people, but he's an enemy of the Russian people. We know that the circumstance is clear that today Putin, in a statement, has in a cold-blooded Stalin-esque way threatened the, quote, self-cleansing of the Russian people. This means that Russians will become Soviet non-persons. Today, I'll be offering legislation that provides for defecting Duma members, diplomats, and Russian government officials that, with their defection, that they would be offered immediate refugee status to come to America. This follows another bill I had last week that I introduced that provided legislation to encourage Russian military defectors and payment up to $100,000 for any Russian equipment delivered to Ukraine. And I appreciate the President Zelensky on Monday reinforced this offer, calling for Russian troops to surrender. Putin's evil designs have backfired. And in fact, unified Republicans and Democrats have never before in the last year. Additionally, it's unified the European Union. We know NATO's unified, but 27 countries of the European Union now are actually providing military aid, including 6 countries that have been traditionally neutral in every conflict. Putin's evil design has backfired, and NATO, of course, remains unified as never before. And again, in any way, we're just so grateful for the success, economic, military success of the Baltic republics. God bless Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. God save Ukraine. Long live Vladimir Zelensky. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. Representative Ruben Gallegos is chair of the Baltic Caucus in the House of Representatives, and he is now recognized for an opening statement.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Ranking Member Wicker, and let me add my welcome to our 3 witnesses for joining us today. Your presence speaks volumes at this critical time in European security, and I want to applaud the Helsinki Commission for holding this hearing focused on the challenges facing the Baltic states. I'm particularly glad the Helsinki Commission is holding this hearing because it's my privilege to serve as co-chair of the House Baltic Caucus, alongside my fellow co-chair, Congressman Don Bacon. We seek to strengthen the defense relationship between the United States and the Baltic countries on a bilateral basis and through NATO. We share the passion that the Baltic people have for democracy and freedom, and strongly believe that the security of the Baltic states is as crucial now as it ever has been. Like all of you, I am horrified and deeply disturbed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing war that it's launching against civilians, targeting maternity hospitals and schools. Russia has amassed a large-scale military buildup, deploying aircraft, air defense assets, and land forces, including in Belarus, and launched a ruthless disinformation campaign that spreads propaganda and lies. Russia's premeditated war in Ukraine has unilaterally and radically changed European security by violating territorial integrity. I have one message for the Russian Federation. We stand with Ukraine. We stand with our Baltic and NATO allies, and our commitment to Article 5 is ironclad. This is the resounding message I hear from my colleagues in Congress, across the House and across the Senate, Democrat or Republican. Our support for NATO is bipartisan and bicameral. But it's not just words that matter, it's also actions. That's why one of my proudest moments in Congress was securing our first ever authorization for the Baltic Security Initiative. It bolsters the defense capabilities of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in areas including air defense, maritime situational awareness, ammunition, C4ISR, and anti-tank capabilities. The Baltic Caucus was also able to secure $180 million for this initiative in last week's omnibus spending package. If we draw any lessons from the ongoing war in Ukraine, it's that we need to ensure our allies and our partners are too prickly for any adversary or competitor to swallow, and we will continue to stand with our Baltic allies in an increasingly dangerous neighborhood. I just want to thank you again and thank the witnesses for being here, for being such great partners. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you, and I hope our panelists have gotten the clear impression of the deeply held support that we have for our three Baltic friends. And now we will call on our first witness. She is Laima Andrikienė, who is chair of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Seimas, the Parliament of Lithuania. Madam Chair, you are recognized. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Honorable Chairman, members of the Helsinki Commission, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Helsinki Commission for organizing this important and I would say unique hearing, as you have three chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committees of the parliaments of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. It is an honor and a timely opportunity to appear before you today. Let me start by saying that a global democratic world order in the past decades has been greatly challenged by the autocratic regimes of Russia and China. This competition of powers was shaping the security environment and bringing a lot of tensions over time, up until the 24th of February. This day not only changed the established but deceptive peace in Europe, exposing the real goals of the autocratic state of Russia, but also unified the democratic Western world and created the legend of the greatness of the Ukrainian nation. The Baltic states for many years have been the whistleblowers, trying to draw the attention of the whole world to Russia's real intentions and ill perception of the world order. The Russian revisionist policy cannot be eliminated by making concessions or one-sided promises to reset the relations. Russia has chosen confrontation with the Western world and will remain a major threat for many years to come. Our necessity is to establish a credible defense, since any conflict on our soil would be too costly, not only for our nations, but for the alliance as well. For many reasons, both geographic and historic ones, the Baltic region was bound to remain the most vulnerable part of the NATO alliance, which required special attention of NATO military planners and allies. In addition to the Suwałki gap issue, Russia's de facto absorption of Belarus means more than a double increase in the length of the Lithuania-Russia border, which is NATO-Russia border. Increased Russia's military footprint in Belarus and its engagement in the war against Ukraine is a game changer and significantly affects defense calculus in our region and requires the implementation of additional defense measures. As we all witness today, the Kremlin employs massive propaganda and disinformation campaigns in an attempt to justify its aggression against Ukraine and to conceal its war crimes and atrocities. Kremlin's anti-Western narratives and its interpretation of the sanctions applied against Russia and of the support provided to Ukraine by the West as an alleged involvement in war against Russia served the Kremlin as a means of shifting the blame. Strengthening deterrence is no longer enough. We need to build credible defense before it is too late. We must change our approach by moving from deterrence based on limited forward presence and reinforcement to deterrence by denial and forward defense. This requires not only reposturing of our forces, but also a change in our mindset. The necessary measures should be taken immediately and continue in the long term. We have already taken robust measures to improve the host nation support capacity and are ready to host United States and NATO forces by providing infrastructure which would enable rapid and smooth deployment of forces and their operation on the territory of our countries and necessary training conditions. We call on the United States of America to step up its efforts in ensuring our defense, in particular by stationing additional substantial permanent combat forces. Prepositioning of US military equipment and enhancement of our region's air defense would significantly improve our security. In our region, air defense with anti-aircraft and long-range missile defense assets is crucial. We need our own Iron Dome. Air defense over the Baltic states has to be enhanced, including by deploying necessary assets, such as combat aviation and surface-based air defense of short, medium, and long ranges in and around the Baltic states. It would show a political backbone of NATO and give us credibility that NATO is ready to and will indeed protect every inch of its territory. For that, we need a strong political will from the US side. Firm support of the US Congress for a persistent US military presence and capability development in the Baltic region is crucial. Lithuania is serious about its defense spending, which will reach 2.5% of our GDP this year. We will not stop at that. Ladies and gentlemen, whilst Russia remains the biggest and the most imminent conventional threat to the Baltic states, China is becoming a pacing threat to our national security. While Putin's regime is using heavy weaponry, China is weaponizing cross-border economic and trade relations. China is eager to dominate, not to cooperate. We have always backed US efforts in defending our common democratic values and containing China's global ambitions. China is targeting the Lithuanian economy with undeclared sanctions and applying various trade restrictions over deepening ties with Taiwan. Lithuania has made it clear that it considers such a manipulative Chinese policy to be contrary to our democratic values and a security challenge. The case of Lithuania is a test for the entire democratic world of our ability to withstand economic coercion and to deter China from moving ahead with its red lines and from using coercion as a regular foreign policy tool to advance its goals. Enhanced coordination of actions with international allies, including in WTO, is needed to respond to economic coercion, find systemic long-term solutions, and send a message to China that such coercive actions will not be tolerated. Lithuania is not stepping back. Engagement with democratic Taiwan is in our direct interest. China's aggressive actions, including its threats to Taiwan more than ever before, may have a direct impact on European security. We thank the United States for its strong support to Lithuania in the face of pressure by China, including also in offsetting the effects of China's economic coercion. In addition, we call on the United States to lead the efforts to encourage our common allies to take a more resolute stance against China's intimidations. Mr. Chairman, thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to address this distinguished group of US congressmen, and I very much look forward to my colleagues' statements and follow-on discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for that insightful opening statement. We very much appreciate it. Our second witness is Mr. Marco Mikkelsen, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Riigikogu, which is the Parliament of Estonia. Mr. Chairman, we are delighted to have you, and you may proceed in your own fashion.
Thank you, Senator Wicker, distinguished members of Helsinki Commission. Those who have witnessed the advance of a Russian brutal war machine with their own eyes are probably keenly aware that it cannot be stopped by gentle words alone. As a young journalist covering the First Chechen War in 1994-96, I learned what Russian authorities were capable of. The carpet bombings of Grozny killed thousands of their own citizens. And for what? To stop the empire from disintegrating and the free will of a people from becoming the norm. The Kremlin's appetite has only grown in 30 years and has not been thwarted by Western diplomacy, which has lacked proactive strategy towards Russia. Russia's blatant aggression and military invasion in Ukraine has caused a fundamental shift in the European security architecture and threatens the peace and stability of democratic nations, not only in Europe, but worldwide. I argue that the future of our common security will be decided in Ukraine. This is why the Western allies should do everything to coordinate and supply a wide range of lethal weaponry and other help to Ukraine as long and as much as it is needed. At the same time, our leaders should not let Russia feel that it has a green light in destroy one of the biggest democracies in Europe. Putin must be stopped in Ukraine. Dear colleagues, Putin's war against Ukraine is the biggest threat to the Euro-Atlantic security since the end of World War II. What we need the most now is a strong and loud allied message that is not only loud in words, but will decisively strengthen the deterrence and defense posture in the eastern flank of NATO. Russian military forces in the Western Military District and Kaliningrad hold a geographic advantage and outnumber NATO forces postured in the Baltic region. Russia's permanent deployment of land forces, fighter jets, and air defense assets in Belarus will strengthen Russia's force advantage even further. It remains the only part of NATO where Russia can create credible military strategic dilemmas for the alliance, even during this crisis, and with short notice if necessary. This is the region of greatest risk of a further Russian aggression. Taking into account the precarious security situation on the borders of NATO's eastern flank, I would like to highlight that continuous US engagement and presence in the Baltics is of paramount importance given the vulnerabilities of the region. We welcome the efforts already made by the US and NATO to bolster the deterrence and defense posture in the Baltic region, but more is needed to effectively deter Russia and avoid the risk of miscalculation, and we rely on your support for this. President Biden's decision to reinforce the Baltic region with various assets and personnel has been much appreciated, and the recent deployments have been of crucial importance in maintaining a credible deterrence posture. We are doing a lot for our own self-defense. All three Baltic states have their annual defense budgets above 2% of GDP, and defense cooperation between our countries is at historical high. However, the worsening security situation has highlighted the need for further US support to immediately fill out a number of critical capability gaps in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I would like to thank the Congress for increasing the resources for Baltic Security Initiative for this year and hopefully also in the future. This sends a strong message to our citizens of US support to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and more importantly, it enables us to continue our critical regional capability development projects. We need your support with ground-based air defense, as the Baltics should not be left out as the only region in NATO still uncovered by air defense. We are also in need of long-range fires capability. These are capabilities that the Baltic states plan to develop on their own with the help of US security assistance, but such large-scale capability developments take time, and the shortfalls in our defense need to be addressed expeditiously. These are shared objectives among the Baltics that are endorsed by the United States European Command. We hope for the United States substantial and consistent security assistance on this, on top of the ongoing projects under the Baltic Security Initiative, such as maritime domain awareness, C-41 and secure communications, stockpiling of large-caliber ammunition stocks, and special forces. We need to keep bolstering NATO's deterrence and defense posture also in the long term. NATO needs a forward defense strategy. This requires strong political will as well as courage to take action. It is detrimental that the United States, as the most credible deterrent, would take leadership role in bolstering the NATO's eastern flank. We consider it critical to have the US presence in the Baltics through NATO framework. NATO should prepare to defend the most vulnerable part of the alliance, the Baltic states. And this includes, first, establishing a permanent increased Allied forward presence in the Baltic states in the land domain. Second, establishing a sound and appropriate NATO command and control C2 structure that is able to plan and conduct military operations with the Baltic states' national home defense forces and allied reinforcement forces. And third, establishing credible air defense posture with additional fighter aircraft and ground-based air defense assets. Thank you to this Commission for the service that you provide for security and stability in the transatlantic community, including the Baltic region. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chairman. And our third and final witness will be Mr. Richards Coles, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Saima, the Parliament of Latvia. Welcome, Mr. Chairman, and we're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you, Honorable Senator Vicker, Honorable Senator Cardin, distinguished members of Helsinki Commission. As a concluding intervention, I think I have the task, the most challenging, which is to describe the threats that are vague and blurred, and those are the hybrid threats and the hybrid warfare that the Baltic countries have been experiencing since regaining our independence. So, to start with, the Russian General Valery Gerasimov once said, "The role of non-military means of achieving political and strategic goals has grown, and in many cases they have exceeded the power of force of weapons in their effectiveness." This encompasses the majority of what I will be addressing you today. Since regaining our independence from the Soviet Union in 1990, the Baltics have been under constant Russian pressure. For us, having lived in this environment for the majority of their lives, this multi-vector warfare, hybrid warfare tactics, and the chaos they attempt to create have become intuitively recognizable and often seep into the background like white noise. A key aspect to understanding Russia's actions is the so-called соотечественники, or compatriots abroad policy. Its officially stated goal is to support Russian living abroad, including defending their interests and rights in their place of residence. In this context, it needs to be emphasized that Moscow, per its compatriots abroad policy and the concept of the Russian world, aims to bind together all Russian speakers, not just ethnic Russians, but quite literally, even the descendants of ancestors who could have had a connection to, say, Tsarist Russia. It considers these minorities as an essential political means of exerting influence. In past regional wars, Moscow has argued that it must protect Russians' compatriots. In this Russian world, Putin's Russia anoints itself with the messianic title of the vanquisher of absolute evil, and within the right to fight against what it considers fascism. Russia has weaponized information for a very long time, with it targeting not only Russian speakers, but also what it deems as its geopolitical opposition, the West too, spreading disinformation and building up twisted narratives aimed at furthering support for its political goals. It seeks to destabilize societies, and it does so also via its export of corrupt practices by abusing Western legal and financial loopholes. Russian doctrine argues that corrupting another country's elites is part of new generation war. The Russian brand of corruption thrives on globalization and depends on access to the global financial systems to loot its own or other states' funds and assets. The West, however, has several advantages: time, allies, and transparency. Transparency is a potentially devastating tool against authoritarians because when corruption is exposed, it delegitimizes the authoritarians. The governments of free societies already face public scrutiny, which positions them well to demand the same of others. Russia's leaders are afraid of accountability. Therefore, it is time for the West to realize that corruption is a severe security issue. The Baltic states have a lot of first-hand experience tackling hybrid threats that previously had not been tackled by democratic countries at all, such as the recent Latvian, Lithuanian, and Poland experience with illegal migrants sent in from Belarus. Although these dangers were somewhat unexpected, the answer continues to be efficient. Therefore, we in the Baltics see ourselves not only as learners in the field, but also as providers of expertise. The Baltic cyber expertise has already benefited democratic countries across the globe. And the same work should continue with border incidents and issues such as countering disinformation and cleaning up financial markets from Russian money streams. A critical issue is Russia's weaponization of its energy exports via its state-owned companies, such as Gazprom. Russia has attempted to varying degrees of success to use energy exports as a bargaining chip in achieving its political goals. Thus, one of the ways of resisting aggression and strengthening our resilience is the 3 Seas Initiative, a new forge of unity between nations in the Adriatic, Baltic, and Black Sea regions, integrating the North-South axis. It is platformed pragmatic collaboration to create a network of cooperation possibilities for 12 countries of the Central and Eastern European region. It seeks to promote large-scale infrastructural, digital, and energy-related investments that are highly needed in this geographic area, as the region still faces underdevelopment challenges, mainly in infrastructure, interconnectivity, and mobility, following 50 years of Soviet occupation and its lasting negative setbacks after the USSR's collapse. 3 Seas would help maintain stability and democracy in countries that the Western countries formally describe as peripheral. But we are not peripheral. We are the frontier where democracy in the entire Western world has to stand or fall. A more robust economic US presence in the region would strengthen transatlantic business, energy, and geopolitical ties to Central and Eastern Europe, while compensating China's and Russia's initiatives and actions to advance and make regional inroads. Accordingly, the 3 Seas merits, in our opinion, American continued political support and investment from across the transatlantic communities. Dear colleagues, for NATO and Europe, this will be a marathon, not a sprint. We cannot afford to be cavalier about our short-term responses, but must do everything in strategic, organized, conscious, and prepared manner. This should not be mistaken for the lack of resolve and determination to act, but it takes time. Russia spent months building up its forces on the borders of Ukraine. Hybrid threats are often aimed at the most vulnerable points of a state. Thus, supporting a well-educated and informed society using the means acceptable to them is a fundamental step in countering hybrid threats. Well-educated and informed societies will be the most resilient force against attempts of historical revisionism, revanchism, and sowing discord. To conclude, For those who worried that standing up to Russia could just provoke Putin and drag the world into war, we only have to look at the history of the 20th century. Nothing is more provocative to a dictator than the weakness of free nations. Acta non verba. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well said, Mr. Chairman, and very well stated by all three of you. We will begin questioning now under the 5-minute rule, and I'm delighted to say there are 12 members of the House and Senate participating in this hearing today, which should be an indication of the level of interest we have and the level of support from both parties and both houses for our guests today and for the countries that they represent. Let me just say that there's no doubt in my mind that Russia would be aiming its troops at your three countries if you were not members of NATO. And so I want to express my support for our NATO friends and for your membership and to say how much that means to us. Mr. Coles, you mentioned the 3 Cs initiative, and Madam Chair Andrikiani, you specifically pointed to the challenge we have from China. I see the 3 Cs initiative as a potential alternative to the economic dominance of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. If we could only enhance its participation, make sure it is financially viable as it needs to be, and provides the countries of participating in the 3 Cs initiative with an alternative to look to lenders and investors who don't have their own nationalistic self-interest at heart. Ms. Andrikiani, would you start with that, and then I'll let the other two of you speak to that. Where do we need to go with this 3 Cs initiative?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, as you probably know, Lithuania has left 17+1 format, designed by China for countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Very divisive format from the EU perspective. And our preference is another format, 27+1, having all 27 EU member states sitting at the table with China and making decisions. 3 Cs initiative, yes, it's a new format, and we see it as a promising, should be effective format to also replace One Belt, One Road initiative and One Belt, One Road strategy, which is, to my understanding, a strategy of de-Atlantization. China is seeking domination in the world, and they are very clear about this. Their message was very clear, sent from their latest Communist Party Congress, that they dominate the world by the year 2050. Then they even said by the year 2030. So we have to coordinate our actions, we have to mobilize, and we are, as I already mentioned, we are for cooperation, but not, we will never ever accept China's domination in the world. Thank you.
Mr. Coles, is 3 Cs getting where it needs to be? I really do appreciate you bringing this up, but where do we need to go from here? What does the West need to do? What does the United States need to do to be helpful?
Thank you, Honorable Chair, for the question. Well, you're absolutely right. Why I'm addressing this is that 3 Cs are gaining more and more momentum and more clear understanding what the long-term benefits of such a cooperation is, particularly in Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe, connecting the North-South axis. U.S. has been already identified as a strategic partner to the 3Cs. There is already operational 3Cs funds established based in London, United Kingdom. So far, what we are advocating and waiting for the financial commitment from the U.S. to be part of this fund. That will be very crucial signal to any potential investor, private investor, to actually engage in the 3Cs in the projects. There are almost over 100 projects identified that are boosting the interconnectivity within the 3Cs region. As I mentioned in my speech, there's a lot of disparities due to the undevelopment through the historical reasons. As we recall, I would say the 3Cs right now for Central Eastern Europe would be a 21st century Marshall Fund by other means. And with this, I think it's a momentum. And we clearly, what Madam Chair said with the 17+1, I have to tell you honestly, the 17+1 has died of natural causes, at least in the political mindset. So therefore, Latvia as well is hosting the 3C Summit this year in June. So we welcome also U.S. leadership and U.S. Congress representatives to be present and to actually start talk on the practical aspects, how we can implement projects, how we contribute. And there's a lot to do. According to IMF, in order to reach the level of interconnectivity, be it energy, infrastructure, roads, rail, and etc., the whole region needs $660 billion of investment. That's a huge difference that we are seeing. And also, it's, in my view, I see the 3Cs projects that are identified in different regions of the 3Cs, they have also military dimension to it. A fine example I can mention, the Rail Baltica in the Baltic countries as well. It has also a close connection to the initiative within the EU, the PESCO, which is contributing the mobility of both NATO troops within the 3Cs region. So therefore, I think the 3Cs is paramount. We should go from words to practical deeds and actually start to work and implement and introduce the projects. And as I mentioned, there are more than 100 projects. And the difference from maybe in past similar ventures in Europe is where the 3Cs fund is actually sharing the risk with the potential investors. It's not just giving loans to somebody, but it's actually the governments that are participating in the 3Cs fund actually taking the risk together with the private investors as well. And from the Baltic countries, from Latvia, for example, and I know for Estonia and Lithuania as well, we have said already the scrutinizing mechanism at the government level, scrutinizing foreign investment, and primarily we're looking at the countries and we welcome from NATO member states, EU member states, on OECD member states investments. Thank you.
Thank you. And before turning to you, Mr. Mikkelsen, I should point out that our Helsinki Commission delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly last year took the advantage of our proximity there to actually attend the 3Cs meeting in Sofia. And I think we benefited from that. I will say there's a learning curve within the United States Congress about the 3Cs that needs to be addressed. But if you could comment briefly, Mr. Mikkelsen.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Wicker. This is a very important question, of course, how to engage U.S. private investments in most possible way in our region. If Russia still is an immediate and existential threat to democracy in our region and perhaps in worldwide, definitely the challenge posed by China is long-term. And we have to think here strategically and actually work together as Europeans, Americans, for more coordinated and more sort of well thought through strategies, including also how do we build transatlantic, truly open trade area. And I think here accommodate better perhaps those investments into free seas countries or into Europe is, I would call actually up to you to support Transatlantic Telecommunication Security Act, which is, as far as I know, in process here in Senate and in House, which allows better to investments into projects for telecommunication in free seas. But first and foremost, we should create as parliaments, governments, to the possibility for private investments flow to our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Senator Cardin. He'll be followed by Representative Cohen.
Well, let me thank all of you again for your presence here. Chairman Coles, you mentioned the asymmetric arsenal that Mr. Putin uses in order to bring down democratic states and to get his way. And you also mentioned the importance of fighting corruption, because corruption gives him the resources to carry this out, whether it's the use of misinformation, the weaponization of energy, or the infiltration into Russian-speaking communities to give the false flag opportunities that he then uses as justification for his military actions. So we saw this in Ukraine very clearly, in the eastern part of Ukraine. Each of your countries have Russian-speaking populations. Since the invasion of Ukraine by Mr. Putin, has there been any activity within the Russian-speaking communities that we should be concerned about that would indicate that there has been efforts made by Mr. Putin to start the seeds of trouble within your country in regards to the Russian-speaking communities?
Thank you, Senator Cardin, for your question. Just coming from other way around, as you posed the question, Russian-speaking population, as I mentioned, it encompasses not only ethnic or Russian just speaking, it's also, the historical ties, be it Tsarist Russia, Soviet Union. By the Putin's logic, or as they put it, this policy, even Finns might be seen at some point, the compatriots. So it's the lunacy the regime is conducting. Of course, it exploits the Russian-speaking populations, wherever they are, in whatever quantities they are in any societies. We saw it just recently, this ludicrous example in Australia, Russian community having a support campaign in Australia. I mean, that is very integrated, society and so on, but they're praising Putin and praising the Russian war on Ukraine. So we cannot exclude any Russian-speaking communities in any part of the world being exploited in this kind of way to gain the goals of the regime. When it comes to Latvia, I mean, the current one, we don't see the Russia's actions in Ukraine has come from part of the Russian-speaking population in Latvia as a shock, really, like saying that, to the last point, we didn't believe that he's going to do that. So there are new realities as well, reality check. But of course, there are, as I call them, Russian chauvinists that, no matter what is going to happen, no matter how you're going to put, incentives into integration and et cetera, they will be committed to Mother Russia, to Putin and et cetera. So that is something that, of course, our security intelligence community needs to work and identify beforehand. But what I have to say, that we still have to do a lot in the West. I mean, it's been 3 weeks right now when we suddenly realized that, propaganda channels, we need to actually shut them down. We see the fine example of Ukraine. If Ukraine didn't abolish propaganda channels back in 2004 and didn't start to strengthen its Ukrainian language, strengthen the national identity, I think the situation would be totally different right now on 24th of February. And this is miscalculation, I think, that Putin made as well.
I think it's a very important point. We were in Narva, in Estonia. Our observations were that the community of Narva is very happy being Estonian. They like their standard of living, they like their government, but they do have connections to Russia. So the question in Estonia, have you seen a problem developing instigated by Mr. Putin in a city like Narva, or is it still very much free information going into the community, understand the realities of what's happening?
Thank you, Senator Garden. This is an extremely important question, of course, how to handle the perceptions and narratives, which sometimes it's coming from the sources you as a government or parliament cannot entirely control. But what we have done throughout the last 30 years, we have first and foremost recognized the issue and the sensitivity of that matter. And the number one priority for us always has been that never mind what language or what the distance where our residents or citizens are, they must feel in Estonia safe and well. And this is why our reforms, economic, social, healthcare, educational reforms have directed on that, exactly how what you said about the feeling. Do they feel that really that Estonia is their home, and they would like to support the idea that the home must be stable and secure? Of course, number one question today is how to handle this massive warmongering propaganda. Estonia cut off all the propaganda channels of Russian national or federal TV stations, which actually we can call them not as the journalistic units or TV stations, but as a kind of formation of Russian army, as a propaganda unit who actually fight for hearts and minds in the countries. They have sort of aggressive attempts. And this is not only in the neighboring countries of Russia, but it's also countries like the United States and others, where they had an opportunity to disseminate through Russia Today and other channels the completely different narratives which are against our interest as a democratic nations. Thank you.
Just to make an observation, I was part of the OSCE mission that came into Estonia in the early 1990s to deal with the handling of the Russian-speaking communities, and I think Estonia was the model country in how to handle minority communities after the fall of the Soviet Union. So I just compliment the manner in which you have engaged all communities within Estonia and protected their rights. Mr. Representative Cohn.
Recognize myself for 5 minutes. I understand your countries, none of which are predominantly Orthodox. They are Catholic and Protestant in majority. But you do have some Orthodox communities. A colleague of mine, a friend who is Greek-American and has been active in the Greek Orthodox Church in Memphis, has a belief that Patriarch Bartholomew could have an influence on Patriarch Kirill in getting him to start to espouse more of the values that Patriarch Bartholomew has about ecumenism and peace and human rights. Do any of you think that there are people in your countries that are involved with the church that might have an opportunity or a thought if this is a possible way to move Putin? I know that the Russian Orthodox Church and Putin have a political alliance, and it'll be hard to break, but is there any possibility that pressure through the religious sphere could have an influence on Putin? Maybe start with Estonia. You've got probably the largest Russian population. Maybe Latvia does, I don't know.
I think that kind of the idea behind your question is very noble. And obviously we should not completely not to take this into account that there exists some sort of possibility that for religious communities there is a kind of hope to work for peace, not for war. But from recent statements of Patriarch Kirill and others in Russia, in Moscow Patriarchy of Orthodox Church, unfortunately tell us that this alliance between Putin and Moscow Patriarchy is rock solid. And unfortunately, they are supporting in their open and public statements currently this aggression, not only against Ukraine, but more wider possible aggression against democratic nations. Thank you.
Yeah, just maybe a few comments. I think, well, Russia is not a secular country. It's obvious, and there's numerous analysis, and experts have written articles on the Orthodox Church, interlinkage with the regime, and how each of them complements each other. And well, right now in Latvia, of course, there was a high expectation within the society, not even a community that belongs to the Orthodox Church, but overall in general public, what the Orthodox Church in Latvia will say about Russia's war in Ukraine. And there was, a long period of silence right now. I mean, long period, I mean several days. But then the leadership of Orthodox Church in Latvia spoke out and condemning the Russian aggression on Ukraine. So, but in the meantime, we see that the leadership of the Orthodox Church in Russia are actually echoing the opposite. That, when speaking about the Russia's war on Ukraine, again, a special operation, liberating, and that is almost, a same war that Russia is conducting towards Ukraine. But in the same time, also, when it's referencing to Baltic states, well, what's going to await Baltic states, as they call it, Pribaltica. So that indicates that the Orthodox Church is very much echoing that the narratives that Putin regime is posing both to their population, but also towards those who are outside of Russia as well.
Yes, ma'am.
If you allow me, I would like to reply to the previous question. Is it
Please.
okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Russian minority in Lithuania is relatively small. It's between 6 and 7%. No public actions in support of Russia's aggression against Ukraine so far. Quite opposite. Our citizens of Russian descent, they are part of united stance of our citizens in support of Ukraine. Ukraine fighting against the aggression. And I am very proud that people in Lithuania, whatever mother tongue they speak, they donated 19 million USD during first week of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So a lot of sympathy, a lot of support, and ordinary people pledged thousands of vehicles and their houses and apartments for the refugees coming from Ukraine. Finally, democratic opposition from Belarus and Russia are seeking a shelter in Lithuania, and they are provided that shelter. Thank you.
Yeah, we met with the Belarusian dissidents when we were there. It was quite an honor to meet with them and saw what Lithuania was doing as a friendly neighbor. Lukashenko they just passed in Belarus election referendum on February 27, which adopted provisions that removed Belarus's previous status as a non-nuclear and geopolitically neutral state. You think they came straight from Putin and Moscow, and is that to indicate a danger to the world?
Thank you very much for your question. As I mentioned already in my statement, Belarus is almost 100% absorbed by Russia. And Lukashenko is a puppet of Putin. He receives orders from Kremlin, and he implements those orders. This fake referendum initiated by Lukashenko is very dangerous. We do not hear care how many caps Lukashenko will be wearing. He is not legitimate president for us. He is not recognized as a president. And what we saw in 2021, those were stolen elections, the dirtiest elections in the modern history of the Republic of Belarus. He could call him the president of Belarus, he could call him chairman of the People's Assembly, but what is really dangerous, that they deleted very important paragraphs from the constitution about neutrality of Belarus, plus nuclear weapons could be displaced on Belarusian soil, in addition to unprecedented number of Russian troops in Belarus. So that is really dangerous, and that is a game changer for us, looking from our perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question, and I'm going to yield to Mr. Wilson. We know Putin's a liar, and he talks about the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine and in Estonia and in Latvia and wherever. We do know that that's a consistent theme in Russia over the years has been Russian people, their heritage, the church, the language, authoritarian leader, the Tsar, and now, Tsar Putin. But do you think he really cares about that, or is that just like denazification, just verbiage he uses to make the Russians think he's trying to do something for the Russian people? Because we see what he's doing in Ukraine is he needed a port on the Black Sea, and that's why he wanted Crimea, and now he wants a highway between Crimea and the eastern provinces there, eastern section of Ukraine, which will become his new breakaway Russian republic. He wants access to the sea, and he'd want the same thing in Kaliningrad, that access that the Suwalki Gap would give him. And in Ukraine, he wants minerals. So has he just used the Russian language as a way to build up his support within the Russian people, or to make it sound like he's doing something for the Russian people, and really all he wants is access to the sea and economic power and minerals? Yes, sir.
Yes, if I may, to answer to this question. The way how Mr. Putin is caring about Russian people, we see today what is happening in Mariupol, what is happening in Kharkiv, in many other cities of Ukraine. There are thousands of innocent people are perished by Russian brutal aggression, bombings. This is how Putin is building a Russian world. They don't care about Russian speaking population or Russians. They only care about this idea of reshaping world by force. And as we all know, Putin and others have declared that the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of 20th century was the breakup of Soviet Union. And this is exactly an idea not only to rebuild Soviet Union, but Russian Empire. And that's where human lives doesn't matter, are their own citizens or the others. And this is where we have to stand as democracy strongly against this right now and do everything what is possible that Ukrainians can win this war, because this war is our war as well for democracy and freedom in our world.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to yield. My time is kind of up, and Mr. Wilson is my co-chair, and I'd like to recognize him for the theoretical 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Cohen. And hey, it's a dream come true for me, parliamentarians, to be with you. When I was in college, I was an intern right in this building, and I had a dream because as a follower of Senator Barry Goldwater, a supporter of him, he believed, why not victory? I have a little book behind my desk when you visit the office, and everybody from Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are invited to come by. We'll even get a picture with the dome of the Capitol over your shoulder. But when you come by, I have a book, Why Not Victory? And what that meant was a liberation of the Baltic republics. And so it's just been an inspiration of mine. And then, of course, it was Barry Goldwater that provided for the ultimate election of the great liberator, Ronald Reagan, with Margaret Thatcher and Pope John Paul II. And so, it's just a dream come true to be here with you. And indeed, the Ukrainian, Putin, I call it Putin's war. Putin's war is a world war. And the people of the Baltic republics can make a real difference. People of the republics have friends, family, all across Russia. They need to hear from you the message of President Zelensky, where he called for the surrender of Russian troops. Now, that would be somewhat bizarre, except we're talking about conscripts, 18 and 20-year-old young persons who were told they were going on a training mission. And then they were told they'd be greeted. Yeah, they were greeted all right with grandmothers saying, stop, go home. And so we have an opportunity, and again, the people across Russia need to know that, again, Putin's done something that I didn't know could occur. He has unified Democrats and Republicans like I haven't seen us unified. And that's why we have legislation pending that would provide for refugee status for patriotic Russian military defectors, that they would receive refugee status immediately to the United States, and whatever equipment that they brought over would be to the Ukrainians. They could be paid up to $100,000. And so this is real. And then later today, other legislation will be providing for members of the Duma, for diplomats, for government personnel of the Russian Federation with their defection, patriotic defection against a dictatorship, authoritarian rule. And it's quite personal to Congressman Galeo, because there was a member of the Russian Duma. Can you believe that when he and I were in Kyiv, that he made a presentation on television, and a member of the Russian Duma publicly threatened to have this wonderful fellow here kidnapped, brought to Moscow, and put on trial. So hey, we have a real interest. We want people from Duma to come here, but to be welcomed as refugees. With that in mind, Chair Andriy Kainai of Lithuania, I want to thank Lithuania, the courage you have of standing up for the people of Taiwan. 23 million people who could suffer the same consequences we've seen with mass murder in Ukraine. But you're standing with the people of Taiwan, and that's just such a positive indication. I would like to get an observation from you with the extraordinary, bizarre statements by Putin about possible nuclear escalation. What do you see as the potential for that, and how should this be addressed?
Thank you very much. First of all, for your kind words with regards to our position on Taiwan. And as I already said, Lithuania is not going to step backwards. We will move forward. We will open our Trade and Economic Representative Office in Taiwan. And of course, we count on your solidarity and on your support. And we are grateful for what you have already done. On Putin's threats, this man is unpredictable. Before the 24th of February, even seeing those, Russia's buildup along Ukrainian border and in Ukraine, not many people in the world believed that Putin will give an order for a massive military aggression against Ukraine. And I have to say that our intelligence also, that was, miscalculated. There were, informations that Russian army will be in Kiev in 48 hours since the beginning of the military attack. This does not happen. And we miscalculated the readiness of Ukrainians to defend their country and the spirit in the country. We also miscalculated the strengths of the Russian army, and we miscalculated the position of the European Union on this. Not many politicians and political leaders expected this dramatic change of the position of Germany and some other countries. And that changed the situation dramatically. What I understand, that Putin is targeting not only Ukraine, is targeting our security architecture in Europe. If Putin remains in power after this war, we will not have peace. Lithuania we have to support Ukraine until the very end, whatever Putin says, until the victory of Ukraine. If we fail in Ukraine, it will be only a matter of time until Putin continues his aggression against us, against NATO allies, against Georgia and Moldova. So we are supporting, Lithuania is supporting Ukraine in many different areas, and we will continue to do this. And as you possibly know, Lithuania was the first one to provide lethal munition to Ukraine and many other things. Thank you.
And again, as I conclude, you're an inspiration. And I also, as to Taiwan, my father served in the Flying Tigers during World War II to defend the people of China. Our families had a deep affection for the people of China. He served in Kunming, Jiangsu, Xi'an. And so the people of America are not against the Chinese people, as we're not against the Russian people. And then I finally want to conclude giving credit to a U.S. Senator, which from the House side is really hard to do. But I want to give credit to Senator Lindsey Graham. We had a joint roundtable at the University of South Carolina Law School, which has been working with promoting rule of law in Ukraine, and particularly to undo kleptocracy. And while I was there, the senator really pointed it out. We're in a worldwide war between authoritarians and people who support democracy. But it really needs to be placed where people can understand. It's a conflict between rule of gun or rule of law. And the Baltic Republics are champions for rule of law. God bless you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I recognize Mr. Gallo for 5 or more minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mikkelsen, I want to ask you about Russian cyber capabilities. In your written testimony, you describe the steps that you'd like to see the United States and NATO take in responding to Russian aggression, largely from a conventional standpoint. In addition to Russia's conventional capabilities, I also worry about how it uses cyber tools. Could you share your perspective on this key issue, and how have you seen Russia employ its cyber capabilities over the last few weeks?
Thank you. Of course, already for last 15 years, Estonia has built very solid and sound cybersecurity architecture in our country in cooperation with allies within NATO. As you know, in Tallinn, we have a center of excellence on NATO's cybersecurity efforts, and actually this is one of the most important success stories what we have created around this particular new domain, where international cooperation is much needed, and we have to be, of course, ready to address upcoming risks. As we have seen throughout last several weeks, cyber domain in regard of Russian aggression against Ukraine has been present, but has not been present as much perhaps we all anticipated in terms of cutting off vital infrastructure or some other areas. So main focus for this aggression has been using conventional weaponry and means like we have seen during World War II. So what we have to today, and actually answering to your colleague, to Representative Wilson as well, what should be done when we hear those threats coming from Russian leadership about possible use of nuclear weapons or chemical weapons, we should not give in into this bluff. This is not the first time Russian leadership is threatening the world with weapons of massive destruction. They have used it also when they even have targeted their opposition leaders, like Litvinenko in London or Mr. Navalny in Siberia a couple of years ago. And also we know what they have done in Syria. So in order to to stand against these kind of threats, we should show our strength and resolve, both in area domain like you asked, but also I argue that today is three key elements are very important. First and foremost, reinforce also U.S. presence in the Baltic area, build solid and sound air defense capabilities in our region, in the Baltic states. Secondly, we have to support Ukraine in all the efforts we can supply to them lethal weaponry and other tools they can fight against Russian aggression and to prevail. And we are sure that Ukrainians will prevail. And last but not least, we have to build strategy how to deal with Russia evolving from this war. And it is unimaginable that we can stick still to Russia NATO Founding Act, which was concluded in 1997. I think so it should go into dustbin.
Thank you. Mr. Coles, I appreciate the detail you shared regarding your perspective on Russian information operations, because I'm increasingly concerned about the threat that Russia poses, especially in the gray zone. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we draw any lessons from the ongoing war in Ukraine so that we need to ensure our allies and partners are too prickly for an adversary or competitor to swallow. That's why regular warfare is so crucial. Recognizing that we're in an unclassified setting, are there any insights you can share about how Latvia is approaching this challenge? Are there particular steps your government is taking to bolster irregular warfare capabilities?
Yes, thank you very much, Representative Gallego, on the question. Well, we have introduced, and now the question is the practical implementation of total defense concept. That is, top down, bottom up, horizontal, vertical, all dimensions, where the capabilities, resilience are developed across the society, across the public institutions. And that is also what I mentioned, what is critical to invest in education, be it media literacy, be it the assessment of consuming the information, because that is, where the pre-orchestrated activities are being conducted by Russia. It's not just, they decided suddenly we are going to intervene or interfere or attack one or another sovereign country. There's a preparation going on, and usually the preparation is through these domains, through information space, through compatriots abroad as well, NGO sectors, and etc. And I would invite as well another area to focus, at least for the U.S. Congress and administration, is to look at the entities that have been working closely or being representing the institution called the Россотрудничество or the Foundation Ruski Mir. The tentacles are wide and deep across the world, and that should be identified and cut off. Last but not least, on the cybersecurity domain, as my colleague Marko Mikkelsen mentioned, I think what we need to do within the NATO, establish not only security defense policies, but also think on counteroffensive measures that we can actually take and implement. Because clearly, in 21st century, the wars in cyber domain will become more and more, and that also includes the critical infrastructure, protection of it, down to the individual consumer as well. And that also applies to purchasing and installing equipment, ICT solutions that are produced in like-minded countries, rather in the third countries, authoritarian regimes at least. So I think that is also an area where we have to really focus and at least establish the guidelines for NATO member states, what to be followed. I'm pleased for the Baltic countries to be also the signatories of the memorandum of the 5G technology development together with the US. I think this is a way forward, and this is where we have to deepen our cooperation and expand it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And for my magic 5 minutes, last question is for Dr. Adrakin. Thank you again for your testimony, especially regarding Lithuania's very courageous stance against Chinese aggression when it comes to economic space. What more could the United States and the EU be doing to support Lithuania's efforts?
Thank you very much, Representative Gallego. As we all know, Lithuania has been experiencing the worst of China's economic coercion, not just bilaterally, but also through secondary sanctions on global supply chains. All multinational companies in China are being pressurized to cut their ties to Lithuania, stop manufacturing and sourcing goods in Lithuania in exchange for their access to China market. So China's measures against Lithuania are a clear case of economic coercion. It's in violation of the WTO rules, and we appreciate your support in the WTO, standing with the European Union, with us and by us. So what we are asking for, first of all, China-free supply chains. We are de facto, building those China-free supply chains. We do not have any other option. Another issue is Indo-Pacific region. We would appreciate your expertise, your experience there, taking into account strategic dialogue you have with the countries of the region. Because we are looking for we have to have this diversification of our export markets. And until now, we were focusing on China and Chinese market. Our expectations were not met. And we are looking for new markets in that region. So your support there would be highly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you're back.
You're very welcome, sir. And recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt.
Thank you. Thank you each for being here today. It's great to have you in Washington and a chance to share a little bit about some of these issues that we have worked on. One thing that has been interesting to see the dichotomy of the way that different people, especially how even in Russia, how Ukraine, Russian speakers and some that are sympathetic to Russia, even if they are in Ukraine. And of course, the Russian-speaking population in the Baltics are certainly a target for propaganda outlets, I would assume. And of course, the Kremlin has persistently accused your governments of mistreatment and discrimination against this group. And their rationale, of course, to protect the Russian, ethnic Russians and Russian speakers. The question, and I'll just open it up to whoever would like to answer, are there many avid consumers of Russia state media in the Baltics?
Well, thank you very much. Well, as we know, Russia is not only right now an authoritarian country, dictatorship, it's totalitarian state. Particularly knowing the last week's new laws adopted that are actually aimed at prosecuting any ordinary people who are expressing their criticism of the regime and etc., and facing almost potentially 15 years imprisonment. And that also applies to the laws of labeling democratic liberal media as the external extremist organizations. So that has, of course, silenced a lot of independent media outlets in Russia. But what the Baltics are doing, and Latvia in particular, we are offering to relocate their activities into Latvia. Like we have Meduza, one of the most well-known media outlets. Right now they are broadcasting from Latvia. They also TV Rain, the TV Dožd. We also, I understand, the Radio Free Europe will be opening their branch in Latvia and work towards the Russian audience from the Baltic countries. So this is a lot of what we are doing. It's just trying to provide any additional alternative information source for Russian people that are residing within Russia. But of course, we know it's becoming more and more limited for any Russian residing people to find any alternative information whatsoever. We see, the alternative internet concept is being introduced, the VPN channels that are being blocked, and this is something where at least those who know the bypassing avenues in Russia can work freely and without the threats of their, workings in the Baltic countries. That we also have set the Baltic Media Center for Excellence that provides, and that was prior to February 24th, both the Russian, the Ukrainian, Georgian, Belarus journalists education on the media pluralism and expertise. So there's a lot of what we are contributing towards a liberal and democratic media to be still functioning even outside Russia. But on the contrary, with the propaganda channels, this is what we've been raising alarm since we regained our independence in 1990. We've been exposed to Russia disinformation since day one, and different intensity of the levels for the certain periods. But at least, of course, we are sorry that the West has somewhat lost the pink eyeglasses in the past 5 years. But it's good that direction is there. But we encourage and we call do more to tackle and to take down the propaganda channels, be it on the classical media outlets or be it on the internet area as well. We are continuing to do that. I don't think very soon there will be any Russian propaganda channels streamed via internet or TV or radio in the Baltic countries as well. But of course, in the meantime, we have to look how we can provide truthful and legible information for the Russian-speaking population in Latvia and the Baltic countries as well.
If I may, just a few words on top of that, what my colleague, Mr. Kohl, said. In Estonia, we already for several years, actually since 2015, we have a public broadcasting channel, TV in Russian language, and also for many years, radio channels. And actually, the popularity of those broadcasting units growing significantly during the last several months, actually. Of course, how do we deal with this Russian aggressive propaganda tools in like TV outlets or tools in internet? But another area which is extremely important is also education, the education system, specifically when we talk about teaching history and what is all related to that, how once democratic society is built up. And in Estonia, we have succeeded quite well, but more dramatically change we need. We see that this is one of the key elements why the Russians today in Russia and Russian Federation overwhelmingly support aggression against an independent nation like Ukraine right now. It is connected that they are manipulated massively by lies disseminated by propaganda channels, but also the other area, which is critical, has a critical importance. They live in a completely different world than we speak about history and how do we understand what has happened specifically during World War II and later on as well, how they do recognize the repressions of Stalin regime, for instance, and many other issues. So that's very complicated situation, and this actually tells us that we have to be ready for very long-term confrontation with Russia. And don't please make also mistake. There are very many Russians who support Putin's aggression today. This is not only Putin.
In addition to what has been said, in addition to EU sanctions, Lithuania implemented additional national sanctions against Russia. We suspended broadcasting of 8 TV channels from Russia. We suspended sale of Russian and Belarusian printed media outlets. We suspended visas, and we also suspended certificates of Russian and Belarusian services and products. I would like to remind you that Lithuania took legal international action outside the scope of the European Union and NATO framework. We requested the ICC prosecutor to open an investigation into the crimes of the Russian Federation and Belarus committed in Ukraine. And also, Prime Ministers of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland have addressed major online platforms with the request to take measures to stop the spread of Russian disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I believe we have one more panel member who's on the Zoom with us, Representative Gwen Moore. Representative Gwen Moore, if you're here, we're going to have to ask you to stick it to 5 minutes because we're way over time.
We're fine.
Representative Moore, you're on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to lift up the importance of the member-to-member relationship rather than deferring always to heads of parliaments. This is really critical time. I think I first visited the Baltic region in 2006 with the Helsinki Commission, and most recently on our 2021 July trip visited the region of concern to us now. Very quickly, a couple of questions, and maybe be more appropriate to ask Mr. Mikkelsen. You raised earlier the concern about us doing more to help, and the bill that's going to be dropped this afternoon is a product of the chair and ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee to try to seek suspension of Russia in the WTO, to really give the president more powers to put some teeth in our sanctions process, and to try to prevent Belarus from ascending to the WTO. And I was wondering if that was in line with what you thought was a rigorous enough advancement or tightening of the reins with sanctions. Also, wanted to ask you and perhaps any of your other panelists about the Suwalki Gap. I mean, it is very awkward, of course. I've been to Belarus too, and it's very awkward that Belarus is a NATO member. And I'm wondering, are there any diplomatic channels available to pressure, I guess, the Belarusians into protecting that 40-mile area, and for them to stand up their commitment as a NATO ally? So I would yield to you all for those answers. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
And thank you. On this first part of the question, what we should do more. I appreciate very highly the leadership of the United States in terms of immediately after Russian aggression, the sanctions which were launched definitely were something what Russia didn't expect. And in cooperation with European allies, we have put up a very strong first phase of sanctions, which will affect Russian capabilities to launch and keep up this aggression for some time. Of course, we see and understand that Russia has not changed any significant step right now in order to turn back or to recognize that they have miscalculated a lot. But we, in this regard, we have to, of course, add up our support to Ukraine through military and weaponry supplies. Yesterday's decision by President Biden was remarkable, of course, but this should be seen as only one step in order to bolster Ukrainians' capabilities to fight their freedom or war right now, or war for their independence. Also, we have to do everything, as I said earlier as well, to make sure that Russia will not miscalculate with possible adventures against some NATO countries. And this is why we have to make immediate steps, perhaps already next week during NATO summit in Brussels. We have to, additional to that, to declare that Article 5 is rock solid and alliance is rock solid. We have to go and show the steps what are going to be visible on the ground in terms of allied presence in the Baltic states, with building immediate steps to build capabilities we badly need in coming weeks, months, or years, like air defense I mentioned. But we have to, and here I conclude, we have to be ready for long-term confrontation with current Russia. And this is where the solid and united strategy of Western allies are needed right now.
Thank you very much. Would you like to respond, sir?
Maybe just a few comments, because
Sure.
it was also addressed on the Suwalki Gap and the dimensions and the threats. Well, of course, we all realize that Kaliningrad Oblast is I think, the most militarized land in the world. And that also requires appropriate response from NATO, allocating, as we were calling, air defense systems, be it both in the Baltics and in Poland in particular. Because as we know, Putin has been claimed that for his ultimatums put forward in December, that NATO is militarizing the eastern flank inappropriately, and that needs to pull its troops away and equipment as well. Well, we know just recently, 2019, Russia deployed Iskander ballistic missiles in Kaliningrad with potential tactical nuclear warheads installed on them as well. This is, of course, a challenge, but I do believe in the expertise and skills of NATO military commanders to actually find the solutions that actually secures the region, and particularly the Suwalki Gap as well. So therefore, the importance is the rapid response, also within NATO, and mobility, particularly in our region as well. I mean, we know we have in past approved the 30x4, but as Chair Mikkelsen mentioned, we already need to review our adapted recently plans, be it the Baltic Defense Plan or wider defense plan across the NATO alliance, because it's totally different security dimension that we are facing right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Congressman Moore. If you're okay, we will now recognize Congressman Cleaver, former mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, a city second only to Memphis in its barbecue, and a great American city, and a great congressman, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver.
I take exception to the last comment, but I've been listening to the meeting, and I would yield back the balance of my time in interest of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Cleaver, and I do like your barbecue too. Let me just ask briefly to the two gentlemen and the three panelists and our lady here. American news media have been reporting that there is progress made between Russia and Ukraine in the talks for peace, and that they've gotten closer and closer, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I find that kind of hard to believe. I heard this morning that there was a ship or ships which had left the eastern Russia, gone through the Japanese Straits, which will take a while to get to Ukraine if they can come through Turkey. That doesn't seem like a long trip like that with a bunch of troops you wouldn't plan such a trip if you were going to looking like you were close to having peace. Any of y'all think we're anywhere near peace? And if not, what do you think could possibly get Putin to agree to a ceasefire and a peace?
If I may quickly, there is no reason to believe that we are anything close to even to ceasefire right now, because Russia has violated already during last few weeks their own agreements to allow peaceful citizens to leave some places like Mariupol or Irpin or some other places. Instead, they shelled evacuees and killed children and women and others. I think that we have to be ready for more serious fights to be seen on the ground. And Russia, I hardly believe that they are ready to capitulate at the moment, because capitulation by Russia is probably the option what Ukrainians are seeking right now, definitely to free their territories which are occupied currently, including perhaps also Donbas and Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Thank you. Just one comment. I think when you talk about the peace talks, I think what the West needs to avoid is to actually, by any cost, to find to be as intermediaries, as to ones that will settle the two sides together. I think it's exclusively right, only up to Ukraine and Zelensky office in what will be the negotiations or talks and what will be agreed or not agreed. I think it's, I will not applaud to these attempts that, European leaders calling 5-6 times to Putin, God knows talking about what, for 1.5 hours, and then each time getting a slap in the face again and again and again. That is, it's just gaining time for Putin to remaneuver, to rethink, and so on. So therefore, the true talks, if they're even taking place, is exclusively up to Ukrainians and Russians that are conducted, I don't know, it's right now the 4th time, and it's only for them to determine, are they ready for any concrete proposals to already being implemented. All rest is just empty noise, unfortunately, from Russia sides in particular, because you cannot talk about peace while you are bombing civilian objects in Ukraine. Thank you.
Very
Yes, ma'am.
Very briefly.
Please.
Composition of the Russia's negotiating team speaks for itself. The head of this delegation is former Minister of Culture. And everybody understands that this delegation is not the one who takes decisions. There were reports that they managed to agree on humanitarian corridors, from at least for the civilians from Mariupol. But even those agreements, so-called agreements, failed. So what could help in reality is our unified position, united position of democracies of the world, our EU member states, NATO allies, other democratic countries in the world. If in the 21st century, in the very center of Europe, we cannot guarantee secure corridor for the civilians who are leaving the war zone, I mean, all our words are nothing. And we in the Baltic states, all our parliaments, we very recently adopted resolutions about security zones, no-fly zones over humanitarian corridors and nuclear facilities in Ukraine. They have 15 active nuclear reactors on the territory of Ukraine. And we know what Russian forces were doing in Chernobyl. Their very first target was Chernobyl nuclear power station. Then they went to Zaporizhia. And there is the third nuclear power station in focus. We have to stop this. We have to avoid really a very big, potentially very big catastrophe. And what could stop Putin is, as I said, already our united stance, our united position, and Ukrainians who are fighting for their freedom, for their independence, for their families, for the future of their children. Thank you.
I appreciate each of you coming. I think the idea of the three of y'all traveling together is brilliant. It's been helpful to this commission, and it's been helpful to our nation as they hear your remarks and your positions. I hope that you're going elsewhere. I mean, it's not a one-night stand, I hope, and you'll be appearing maybe in Canada or the UN or some other. Do you have some other formats planned?
Yeah, thank you. We are traveling, yes, constantly in recent times, and this is something where actually, as Lima said, the united position is built around the very vital topics which matter not only for us, for our security, but for our security of our allies.
Well, thank you again. And on my trips, which I've made to each of your countries, and I think there have been maybe 3 or 4 times I've been in each of your countries and met your parliamentarians in the OSCE, I have a deep affection for your people. My grandfather immigrated to this country, my great-grandfather from Lithuania. But besides that, your people are just nice folks. They enjoy freedom. When you visited your countries, they're free countries. They are Western countries. They want to remain so. They should. Same thing for Ukraine. And we need to make sure that people aren't put under the yoke of an authoritarian figure again, as they have been in the past, and not have to surrender freedoms and opportunities. At the last meeting we had, somewhat akin to this, we had 3 kind of think tank people come before us. A lady from that used to be at the State Department, and a gentleman who was an ambassador to, I think, to Ukraine in the past, Mr. Taylor, and a general. And they gave us remarks. And at the end of the hearing, I said, I want to deliver a message to Mr. Putin. I doubt he got the message. TikTok took it everywhere, but not to Putin, I suspect. And I told him, I said, Mr. Putin, maybe you should just have a little drink of vodka, take a Blenny, put a little caviar on it, watch the Olympics, and chill. It would have been good if he did that. He did not do it. I guess the only thing I can hope for now is something that many of my Christian friends say, and that I believe is accurate even though I'm not Christian, which is WWJD. What would Jesus do? And Mr. Putin, if you're truly a Russian Orthodox member and believe in the Orthodox Church, what would Jesus do? And Mr. Putin, do it. With that, I appreciate your attendance. Hearing is adjourned.